In my view, marketing is the thread that connects everything. The voice of the customer, and I mean at scale, not relationship by relationship, is essentially the why of any business.
Hi, I'm Neil Perkin, the host of Think with Google Firestarters. And Firestarters is a series of insightful conversations with the interested and the interesting of the marketing and innovation communities. And today, I'm lucky enough to be speaking with Alison Orsi. So Alison is a consultant, board advisor, executive coach, and experienced practitioner in marketing transformation, and also the former EMEA CMO at IBM, where she led IBM's digital marketing transformation. So Alison, welcome to Firestarters. Delighted to have you. Can I begin by asking, what is your provocation for the Firestarters audience?
Sure, Neil. Thank you very much for having me. I think my provocation for the team is something that I've been working on for a while, which is that the role of marketing and therefore the role of CMOs needs to evolve. Because we have a challenge of relevance and impact. And what I mean by that is, I think marketing is an engine for growth, but for me, the potential contribution to the business is much, much bigger than brand and marketing qualified leads. It really is about customer orientation.
Brilliant. So a lot of things to talk about there. So I'd love to just get more sort of your insight into how you see marketing changing, first of all. So we can talk about the role of the CMO and how you see that changing as well alongside that. But let's talk about marketing as a function. So what is it that marketing needs to do in order to change? How does it need to change?
I think one of the biggest challenges that I've experienced is that in some organizations, marketing can operate as a silo. And it means that we're quite inward looking as a function. The big challenge is that customer experience touches every single part of your business. And this is true, especially in B2B, which is the world that I know and understand well, but I think in many other organizations as well. And so if marketing only focuses on its conversations with customers, we miss the opportunity to improve the customer experience end to end. In my view, marketing is the thread that connects everything. The voice of the customer, and I mean at scale, not relationship by relationship, is essentially the why of any business. And so if you can think of marketing as the mortar between the bricks or the connective tissue of a business, marketing is therefore responsible for driving collaboration across the whole business to improve customer experience.
And I mean, there's so much in what you're saying there. I think it's really interesting to kind of think about that evolving role of marketing, and particularly that sort of idea of sort of marketing being the connective tissue of the business. I guess the question it immediately leads to for me is, if marketing is in danger or at risk of actually operating in a bit of a silo, how can it work with other functions across the business which might have some part in the ownership of customer experience or might be customer facing?
Yeah, sure. I mean, as marketers, we're very comfortable with understanding our audience, and we spend a lot of time really thinking hard about customer journeys. And I think the first place we can start is to really think about mapping that customer journey end to end, not just their digital journey, not just the journey that might start with advertising and the influence of awareness, or how events or their digital journey might end in a marketing qualified lead, but more fundamentally, what's their experience with your organization end to end. And that means that marketing's impact can be greater than simply brand or demand generation. It can really think about, what can we do to improve the customer's experience end to end. So in a project that I ran relatively recently, our starting point was to map that customer journey right from discovery, right the way through to signing a contract with us, through to potentially ending a contract. And when you look at it in that context and start to map where the challenges are in that journey, where the customer pain points might be, you start to get an insight into which parts of the organization you might like to partner with. So, for example, it could be that our contacts aren't the best in the industry and they are a source of frustration. It might be that our sales teams, in a retail environment, the teams on the ground don't have all the information at their fingertips to be able to deliver the best customer experience. There's lots of ideas and opportunities for innovation at every step of that customer experience that may be an opportunity for marketing to get involved. At very least, you can inspire innovation in service of the customer and have something new and create a new point of differentiation that you can talk about as part of your marketing campaigns.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I think as you were speaking there, I was thinking about Conway's Law, I think, as it's called, which is that organizations design systems which mirror their communication patterns or structures. And so consequently, you often get that situation where, I don't know, for customer service, a customer rings up or something and a department says, well, we can't solve that. You need to speak to this department over there, whatever, and it's working for the organization, but not for the customer. So I'm curious to just dive a bit deeper into what that actually means in terms of ways of working. So how can marketers work with other customer facing parts of the business in order to genuinely join up that journey?
I think sometimes it's just simply as easy as making the first move. I'm inspired by a guy called Keith Ferrazzi, who's written a book called Leading Without Authority. And his premise is that this idea of co-elevation, and the people in your team that you need to get a job done aren't necessarily the people that work directly with you, or as a CMO, the people that report to you. It's everyone in the organization and the system that you need to partner with to get the work done. And so this is about caring about the success and development of others and the entire organization or the entire system, rather than just yourself, which means that you can create a culture that builds mutually beneficial partnerships. So it can be as simple as having a conversation that says, customer feedback is telling us that this particular piece in the process could be better, or our market research suggests that this is a potential point of differentiation. How can we partner with you to help? And often, if you invite the conversation, in my experience, people will at least engage. And as you start to collaborate, this is very much about helping the organization move forward, because at the end of the day, we all work in the same organization, have the same goal. We're working towards a common outcome. And so start to brainstorm, offer ideas, bring connections together, because what happens is, in that context, you can think very differently about what feedback might look like. You can think very differently about how quickly a customer feedback loop might run. And the reality is that almost every single part of the organization will be running some kind of innovation program, because everybody is continually striving to get better. The bigger challenge is, how might you help the organization organize that in a context that means that everyone's innovating in the same direction in service of the same customer experience? How might you reprioritize what people are doing so that different innovations come together at the same time? Or indeed, you might find that different parts of the organization are innovating in silos when a better outcome. So you mentioned customer service earlier. One of the classic examples is you can have a customer service team who are innovating to close customer tickets as quickly as possible. So they're focused on the goal, and their metric is, I need to be able to resolve the customer's problem in hours, not days, or in minutes, not hours. But perhaps they're not looking at, but there's been this big spike in this one particular issue. How might I feed that further back up the chain to notice that there might be a product issue or a process issue that needs resolving? So it's more about thinking holistically about the customer experience than it is about all the different pieces, and particularly in large organizations that can be every silo innovating independently.
And I think you've said before now that change happens in the gaps between the silos of business, which I really like. Is that what you mean by that in terms of transformation? Yeah.
Yes, I do. I mean, I think one of the challenges, is that everyone thinks within their team. And in my experience, if you think about marketing as the mortar or the red thread that runs through a business, in my experience, the opportunity for change is at the intersections of a matrix in a large organization, or at the edges and in the gaps. And by inviting people to close the gaps, that's where you see the real innovation and the real things move forward.
I guess the other relevant thing to talk about here is small multidisciplinary teams, perhaps. So who might be working in agile ways, perhaps. I know you kind of brought agile ways of working into IBM, for example. Do you think there is the opportunity for more multidisciplinary working in that way, small agile teams?
100%. I think particularly when you're starting to drive cross-functional change, having small teams that are working in service of a particular outcome and a particular goal, but working together in an agile way allows everyone to move forward at a common pace. They work together, they agree what the priorities are for the coming week, and it will accelerate change. It means that teams can have a methodology and a system to collaborate, a framework to collaborate that helps people communicate clearly, surface roadblocks quickly, and identify what the biggest priority is to move forward and what help they might need to move forward. And if you do that in a multidisciplinary way, it can involve everyone very, very quickly.
And I'd like to go into that further, if I may, because I think your experience about introducing agile at scale to IBM, I think is a really sort of interesting kind of example. So just to draw on your experience, what were the main kind of challenges of introducing that as a way of working, shifting kinds of ways of working and mindsets? What were the main challenges that you experienced there?
I think inherently we don't like change as a human race, and so it's about finding ways to do that in a way that is fun and exciting. And we started with pilot teams. The idea was that we'd pick one team, one discrete project, and invite some curious minds to engage with us and try something new. And you have one team that starts to think and engage in an agile way. One of the things we learned very quickly is that doing agile isn't enough. You have to be agile and think agile. And so that team that we ran as our pilot maybe 10 years ago now became very productive very quickly, but it was very bumpy first few weeks as they changed the way that they traditionally thought. That, the first sprint, everyone wanted to go away and do some planning. And it's like, no, this is about doing. This is about getting things into market, and the way your relationship with data changes. It's not about everything you know from history. It's what you learn in the 2 weeks and how you might, in however long your sprint is, and what you might do and course correct moving forward. The result was that team set themselves some goals and beat their own goals in half the time. Had so much fun doing it because it allowed them autonomy to be creative and to do what they needed to do in service if they got their goal. Tasks that might have taken weeks because they were the focus of that, sprint, were done in that sprint because they weren't put off. They found ways of fixing problems and navigating challenges. And they had so much fun that everybody in the rest of the organization wanted a bit of what they were doing. And so we started to introduce agile more holistically through the organization. But what that meant was a lot of training, a lot of coaching, and really taking time. Transformation takes time, and you can invite people to work differently. But in my experience, you have to show them, you have to invite them, you have to coach them, you have to give them time to make mistakes. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges in any transformation, strategic or otherwise, is that businesses don't spend enough time thinking about the human aspect and how you bring the people along.
Yeah, I know you've spoken before about the need to kind of bring people on a journey if you're going to make change stick. So just to kind of needle at that a bit, I guess what you're saying there is that the people side is as important as the doing bit. Yeah, so you've got to actually change the mindset. So tell me a bit more about that. What is it you need to change? What is the kind of bringing people on the journey piece? how do you actually make that change stick?
I think it's about making the change less threatening in a certain way. I mean, I think often I've seen organizations drive transformation because there's some strategic change. There's a lot of very incredibly smart people will work to define what a new business model might be or what the change needs to look like. And then there's the communication often tells the organization what to do, but doesn't show them how. And often to make change stick requires a change in behavior, in ways of working, in different methods of collaboration. In our digital marketing transformation, we needed to help our sales teams and our marketing teams work together in a different way as we worked through. And so often, and as we've worked through different marketing transformations, as we've centralized more of our function, for example, the way that our field marketing teams used to work and deliver results had to fundamentally change because they needed to collaborate differently with colleagues in more central roles. And so in doing that, we had to codify what behaviors we wanted and what behaviors would be helpful. We had to help people understand how their day would look differently, what they would need to look different, what they would need to do differently, what tools they might need and data they might need to make that work. So one of the best ways I saw this done as an example, Neil, was we, as part of our digital transformation, we obviously had to think about a way of democratizing data. And we built a new centralized dashboard, if you like, that brought all the data from all our systems to allow people to measure the effectiveness of their marketing and to drive optimization. And of course, everyone was doing that with data independently. What we wanted to get to was a single version of the truth. But introducing that way of working and that way of thinking took time. So the first step was, this is the new system. This is going to be our single source of truth. You have a period of time, everybody, to work with it, to tell us what's wrong. Because the first thing is, if you're introducing a new source of data, everyone will start to pick holes in it. So you've got a month, help us clean it. Tell us everything that you can find that's wrong and we'll fix it. After that, we start using it as the single source of truth in all of our cadence, in our reviews, in our optimization decisions. But we're not going to make decisions on the back of it. We're just going to practice using it. And so that meant that we had a month of coaching the teams through, well, what might this indicate? How might this, what might this suggest that we do differently? What should we stop? What should we start? Where should we invest more heavily? And after a period of time, that was it. Decisions were made solely on that system. So you give people time to learn, adjust, test, play, make mistakes, experiment, and then move forward. Similarly, when we were introducing a completely new marketing model, we actually took a roadshow around to all the teams in the field and let them experience what it would be like working in that way before we actually asked them to.
Yeah, it's such an interesting idea. You're talking earlier about sort of showing, not telling.
Yes.
And that's an interesting kind of thought about how you enable and facilitate change to actually happen. So the roadshow, I guess, would be one example of that. But what would be other examples of this kind of show, not tell approach?
I think for the most part, it's also about helping the leaders in the organization understand the change and what they can coach their teams for. So again, there's in that telling of how to run, there's everybody in the system needs to understand what needs to be different. And that might also mean that we have to provide daily coaching. One of the biggest challenges often is we can make a change, everyone's excited for the change, but after a period of time, if the management systems don't change, if the questions that are asked during the course of a cadence or review, or if the reward system doesn't get updated to recognize new behaviors, new ways of working, what will happen is, and particularly under periods of stress, everyone will go back to what they know. We know how to make this work. Let's just go back and do it the old way. And so there's an element of providing that psychological safety for people to make mistakes and learn, but also a focus on leading rather than managing. And by that, I mean giving the teams the autonomy to make the decisions for themselves, resisting the temptation to tell them what to do, but to help them work it out for themselves.
I think that's such an interesting point, because it was great the way you were talking about the sort of single source of truth and how you allowed and enabled teams to kind of practice with the data almost, to kind of work out a new way of working. So if as a CMO, you're looking to encourage the team to be more data driven, more adaptable, what's the mindset that, how can you encourage the right kind of mindset to enable that kind of adaptability and data driven thinking?
We started to play games, actually. So the first thing was to invite that mindset. We would use storytelling, we would use examples, and the first thing was to encourage everyone to think that they were a data scientist, right? Who are the data scientists in the room? And everyone kind of would point at the three guys who'd coded the system. It's like, no, it's all of you. And the biggest difference for us was helping people understand that it's not about the data. The data actually is there to help you. It's about the questions that you ask. And so what we were focusing on was helping the teams ask better questions and then use the data to help them answer those questions. So what is it that you need to know? What's the information that you need? What's the data point that you need that will help you decide how to get better results from your campaign, how to improve the content that you're creating, how to increase the number of marketing qualified leads that you're generating from a particular piece of work? What are the levers that you can pull? But it's that curiosity. And so what we were trying to foster in the team was more an idea of curiosity and asking better questions, and then using the data rather than starting with the data and wondering what it was telling you.
Yeah, so interesting. I'm going to come back to part of your provocation was about the role of the CMO as well, because we've talked a lot about marketing transformation, but and how the marketing function is evolving. But let's talk a bit more about the role of the CMO. So how do you see that evolving? And you mentioned about champion of the voice of the customer and so on, this idea of co-elevation of different sort of parts of the organization working together. So what does that mean for the role of the CMO?
I think that means that it invites the CMO to have different conversations with their peers. And as I was talking about, really thinking about that end-to-end customer journey, bringing that to life for their peers across the organization, bringing not only, how do customers perceive us in the market, but really championing what's working and what's not in our end-to-end ability to serve our customers. What are our competition doing better than we are? Where are they winning? And I'm working with an organization at the moment that is absolutely focused on every single step of the customer experience, because they want no chinks in their armor, not one. And so they are looking at everything from transparent pricing to how their contracts work, to how their customer service teams operate, to how they show up at a customer's address. Every single thing, they want to be the best. Now, in all organizations, there's always opportunities to improve. So it's that idea of restless reinvention. And so the best CMOs are helping to coordinate how that might be in service of differentiation, and then amplifying that in a way that makes sense in the way they're telling their stories.
And I guess one thing I'm thinking about as you're talking there is just about the kind of the role of the CMO alongside peers like the CFO and chief operating officers and so on. And it feels at the moment as if future CEOs tend to be drawn more from financial directors, CFOs, and operations rather than marketing. Why is that, do you think?
I think it's about the business challenge that faces many organizations in the business environment. And as CMOs, the opportunity is for us to be able to have those commercial conversations around the table. And so really bringing this thought of collaborating for innovation across the organization in service of commercial success will strengthen the voice of the CMO around the board table, because there'll be collaboration with the CFO, there'll be collaboration with the COO, particularly in operations. If you're starting to think about other elements of the customer experience and how that works, it might be with HR in terms of how people are enabled or how people are rewarded. So at all functions, I was working with with the CTO because we needed some platform changes. I was working with our chief operations team because there were some changes in process in terms of order processing and contracting. So there's lots of different ways, and thinking about that customer and journey end to end means that you have to understand how your organization works end to end, and understand how you can connect the dots between all of those silos that we were talking about before.
And you mentioned there about working with the CTO. One of the ways in which marketing is changing is obviously that it's becoming far more technologically driven, and every CMO needs to have a marketing tech stack. So what does this mean for the role of the CMO? How much does a CMO need to understand technology, the tech stack? What does that mean for how the role is changing there?
I think it depends on the organization, but 100% as a CMO, you need to be curious. You need to understand what the art of the possible is, and get an understanding, even if you're not, I wouldn't call myself a technical marketer, even though I spent my life in IT. But I understand enough of what's possible with the MarTech stack. I'm interested in new technology. I keep tabs on what my competition are doing and wonder how they did that, and built great relationships with my technology team to help them understand what I might need, and how we might work together to deliver better outcomes.
And just building on that, AI obviously is really big and changing marketing a lot at the moment. So what does this mean in terms of what a CMO needs to understand and needs to know? How can they make good, smart decisions about AI, for example?
Making good, smart decisions about AI is always going to be a challenge, because it's moving so fast. And so once again, I think the real question is curiosity. And particularly with AI, roll up your sleeves and start engaging and experimenting. I think we don't know yet to what extent AI will be useful in our roles as CMOs. I think there's plenty of places where people are playing today. I'm hearing everything from designing retail experiences through to everything we know about image creation and copy. You need to be curious and you need to understand, because if we all embrace AI in the way that at its current potential, it essentially becomes a race to the bottom from a creativity perspective. So understand and be curious about how your teams are using it, because I guarantee that your teams are using it today. Understand the art of the possible, but also be really clear where AI can help and where human touch is imperative, continues to provide differentiation. And for the most part, I think it's not outsourcing tasks to AI. It's really thinking about how AI can accelerate what it is that you're doing. So use it as a thinking partner, as a thought starter, as an ideation partner, but then apply all of the training, all of the knowledge, all of the insight that you have as an experienced marketing leader to make the ultimate decision.
Yeah, that's really interesting about the combination of AI and human. I mean, it sounds like what you're saying there is that there's an opportunity to perhaps integrate it into workflows and processes in a way that it can augment and make more efficient, or it can support, but actually it's still really a process which has that kind of human oversight. And
100%. I mean, that's how businesses have been using AI. We don't even talk about how AI has revolutionized our back office systems anymore, because it's just the way that things work. The new frontier is in generative AI, and there are more challenges. However, the same principles apply. It is about where can it simplify workflow, where can it add value, where can it create space and time for us to do those things that only humans can do? How does it create more time for creativity and innovation by automating the tasks that are more repetitive and lower value?
And if you're a CMO that really wants to encourage the right kind of environment and mindset in your team, you mentioned curiosity as being really important, and the ability just to try things out, to experiment with things, to kind of practice, if you like, and in a safe to fail environment, I guess. How can you set up that environment? How can you help that kind of that mindset change, or that create the right kind of environment to enable that kind of psychological safety?
I think there's a lot of work that that's out there that will help teams essentially embrace a growth mindset. That's what we're talking about. It is that willingness to experiment, that opportunity to fail, to celebrate failure as a learning opportunity, and to build resilience in those scenarios. For many of us, we've grown up learning that failure is a bad thing. And really, it's about reframing that in an opportunity to learn and to figure out how to course correct quickly. That's the biggest mindset shift I think I learned. And it requires a shift both in individuals and in the way that teams are led. There's often a fear of losing control and things getting out of hand, particularly when you give the idea of giving teams free rein to experiment. So the easiest way to do that is to put up some guardrails, to focus on specific projects, to set some boundaries on what can be changed and what can't be changed. The best analogy I heard was to think about directing traffic by giving rules. So when you're in control, it's a set of traffic lights. It's a red, amber, green scenario. You can also control traffic flow with roundabouts. And so think about how you might deploy some rules of the road that would be the equivalent of a roundabout, where the team have to stop and make a decision, a conscious decision, but they don't have to wait for someone to give them the green light to move forward.
That's fascinating. I think I'm good. We're running short on time, unfortunately, but I've got one final question for you, which is just really a kind of catch-all question, if that's all right. So with your experience of transforming marketing teams and working with lots of other teams to transform them, if a CMO came to you and with an ambition to really transform their team and make it more technology, data-driven and so on, more adaptive, what are the three pieces of advice that you would give to that CMO?
Good question. The first thing I would say is be really clear on your outcome. What is it that you're trying to do? What's the change, the behavior change that you'd like to see? Where are you going from and to, and being really clear about that, because it helps you decide the actions that you need to take, but it also gives very clear direction and purpose for the team. And the most important thing is to be able to articulate why. What are you in service of? The second thing I would do is find a small team. If this is a particularly large, particularly significant different way of working, find a pilot team. Find that team that is going to lean in and stress test it for you. Run some pilot projects so that you can prove the concept to yourself and to others, and see the impact that it can have, but also work out the kinks, because one of the biggest challenges is we then don't listen to teams once this has happened. And then the third, so one, define what it is that you want and your why. The second is pilot it with a small team that's going to help you iron out the kinks. And then the third is communicate. All right. So help the teams do a lot of show, not tell. Let them experience the change, but make sure that communication is two-way, so that we're not only continually reinforcing the change, the behaviors, rewarding the behaviors that align to that new way of working, but also that we're listening to the teams in terms of what they don't understand, what's not working. There will almost certainly be some unintended consequences because none of us can think of everything. And so that communication feedback loop is what will help the change stick.
Brilliant. Such wise words. And Alison, unfortunately, we're out of time, but thank you so much for being part of Firestarters. That's been super insightful.
Thank you.
And for those that are listening or watching, please don't forget to subscribe and to share, of course. But my thanks again to Alison Orsi for some brilliant insights there.